Hi again. Like I said, I'm going to occupy this place for the longest period, but I have been quiet for the better part. Can I request all of you, as a mark of respect to the other guests as well as to the speaker, to either switch off the phone or to put it on silent, if you don't mind, please. How many people in this room are familiar with the story of the first printing press? It would be a shame if this room didn't know. How many people are familiar with it? Okay, that's Roland, just one person, that's it. The Gutenberg press happened almost 600 years ago, and I'm certain that nobody is unfamiliar with the name Gutenberg. It was a technological revolution of its time, and it created what we know today as mass communication. You wouldn't have had mass communication if you didn't have the printing press. Do you know who was the most well-known beneficiary of the Gutenberg press? I feel like Derek O'Brien doing a quiz here. Yeah, do you know who was the biggest beneficiary? Sorry? Yeah, I heard the answer, that's right. The Gutenberg Bible was a product of the Gutenberg press. And the church's ability to put the word of God into so many people's hands, millions of people's hands, was only and totally because of the Gutenberg Bible. The Gutenberg press, I'm sorry. But ironically, the biggest beneficiary, or I would say it also became the most powerful weapon in the hands of the biggest revolutionary against the church. And you know who that was? You heard of a guy called Martin Luther? Martin Luther was the guy who started Protestantism. Protestants came into being because of Martin Luther. He revolted against the church because of the goings on at the time, which he was against. He was a good Jesuit priest. And strangely enough, all the pamphlets that he used to socialize his revolution was as a consequence of the Gutenberg press. So he socialized it. He was able to print thousands of pamphlets with the message against the church and take it to people's houses. He socialized it. So ladies and gentlemen, social media, as we think about it today, was alive and well as a mechanism 6 centuries ago. It's just that the internet actually uses it in a very different way for a different generation. But social media is not new. Our second speaker of today is a futurist. He, however, firmly believes that without the marriage of tradition and technology, both become important. You have no future. Allow me to tell you a little more about Anders Sorman Nilsson. Anders Sorman Nilsson is a reformed lawyer. Now, to avoid any confusion, that is spelled L-A-W-Y-E-R. Just there's no confusion. His reformation and his penance has found form in his research and consultancy firm called Think, spelled T-H-I-N-Q-U-E. Anders is a futurist and innovation strategist who helps executives and business leaders decode trends, answer disruptive questions, and capitalize on foreseeable and unpredictable futures. His latest book, called Dialogue: How to Win the Digital Minds and the Analog Hearts of Tomorrow's Customer, is hot off the press and is featuring in top-end business media like the Financial Review, the Sky News Business, and ABC National Radio. Anders has a global executive MBA from the University of Sydney Business School, and he has completed programs of education at the London School of Economics, Stanford Graduate School of Business, and our very own IIM Bangalore. When he's not consulting with clients like Apple, Xerox, Johnson & Johnson, Schwarzkopf, Eli Lilly, Pernod Ricard, and Clinique, he likes to get his hands dirty with no person less than his mother. Her name is Brigitta, in the turnaround strategy for her century-old bricks and mortar store in Stockholm. Today, he's excited to be back in New Delhi to speak on Digilogue, how to win the digital minds and analog hearts of tomorrow's customers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a round A warm round of applause to Anders.
G'day. Can you all make sense of my slightly weird Swedish Australian accent? It's making sense. I'm seeing some of the introverts nodding out there in the audience. I'm going to take that as a yes. Good evening, or Shubh Sandhya, as I gather it's called here in New Delhi. It's nice to be back, and it was fascinating listening to Rob's story a little bit earlier on. While he was speaking, I was observing a number of you, and this sounds maybe a little bit awkward and a little bit stalkerish. However, this was not my intention. But specifically, what I was focusing on was observing your wrists. That sounds a little bit stalkerish in some ways. But what I was observing was a number of these ones. These great high-tech devices that we insist on wearing on our sleeves. In fact, just by show of hands and by way of a little bit of socio-metric research here today, can we just raise our hands if we are wearing an analog watch on our wrists today, please, ladies and gentlemen? Please look around the room. I mean, I find this fascinating. This is like 50% of the audience. Just by show of hands, who's not going to raise their hands no matter what I ask tonight? Are there some of those as well? Okay, this is good to know. It is a trick question, however. But my question is, why? In an age of digital media where we have digital time all around us via our smartphones, our tablets, our phablets, our MacBook Airs, digital time that automatically updates no matter what time zone that we happen to be in, why do we insist on wearing analog watches that we then have to set by digital time to make sure that they're actually accurate? Why is this? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not a rhetorical question. Why do we insist on wearing these? Old habits die hard. Any other reasons? Yes? You want to be flexible. Perhaps the digital battery dies some stage, right? So we can't use it. Did anyone get given your watch, perhaps by a loved one? Maybe a family member, maybe your wife or your husband? Anybody like that? Okay, so either it has some emotional sentiment to it, or you just have to wear it to make sure that you don't get disappointed, right? My main argument tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is that yes, we are living in digitally disrupted times, yes, here in India as well. Increasingly, the consumer's mind has a need for access, speed, precision, and timeliness. I believe in many ways our rational minds are doing their due diligence digitally today, and increasingly so in the future. This is critical. However, the customer's mind, the consumer's mind might be digital, but our hearts, our emotional hearts that we also need to win and engage in our branding efforts is enduringly very much emotional and analog. This is the thing I want to explore with you today, ladies and gentlemen. Let me explore this idea of the digital and the analog for just a moment. As a futurist, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with the digital world or the world of high technology. On the one hand, I love it because it gives people like Max Harpham, who's behind me here and on the side screens, an 8-year-old kid in Sydney, Australia, who's the 8-year-old son of one of my colleagues in my research firm, Think. It gives him the ability to do incredibly well at school. It gives him the ability to communicate cross-generationally. And technology gives him the ability to surpass his peers at school. All of this is fundamentally inspiring because Max Harpham was born profoundly deaf. If a freight train went past Max Harpham, this little kid that's into skateboarding and outdoor sports, he wouldn't be able to hear it through analog natural channels. But because of an Australian innovation, the cochlear implant, of which he has 2, he's able to hear digitally amplified sound. his parents are able to pass down some intergenerational wisdom into the future, and his teachers are able to connect with him intergenerationally. So this gives me sort of digital goosebumps in a sense. The other bits about digital that I truly love is that digital and digital marketing gives us as brand professionals and as CMOs the ability to turn marketing away from just an art into a science. Because digital gives us digits. It gives us digits that we can measure our return on investments in digital campaigns. Because as human beings, we're kind of fundamentally suck when we listen to our gut instinct at times. In fact, and I should just say, this research, of course, is only relevant to Australians. But the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Productivity Commission a few years ago did some research on what happens when we listen to our gut feel as individuals. They asked the question, when you spend, or when you think you've just spent $100, what was the actual audited amount that you spent? And they found that there was just a little bit of discrepancy. In fact, what they found is when we say we spend $100 on transport, the real amount is $104. Hey, but that all sort of comes out in the wash, right? But it gets more disturbing. When you give your credit card to your loved ones to go shopping for homeware and design, etc., when they say they spend $100, what they actually spent, ladies and gentlemen, is $132. If you go to the pub later on tonight and you spend some money on a drink potentially, and you say to your spouse, I spent $100 in the pub last night, the real amount was $158. And increasingly worrying what we say we spend when we go to a casino. $100 equals $735, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes we suck when we listen to our gut feel about what we spend. And I believe the future of marketing is getting a good ROI on your marketing spend. Digital can help us with this. I also find digital gives power to the consumer, or power to the user. That's you and me. One story that I tell around the world when I travel around hanging out with clients is the story about what happened in Kerala, here in India. Because the fishermen in Kerala, carrying out a very traditional trade of being fishermen, being in aquaculture, for many years they listened to their gut feel. They had the option of taking the catch of the day back to 11 different harbors on the coast of Kerala. But many times they would just opt to go to the harbor or the market that was closest to their homes based on the fact that they wanted to go and see their families and because they were hungry at the end of the day. One fisherman one day got pretty clever because he realized that you could get coverage up to 22 kilometers away from the shoreline. He picked up with his life savings a Nokia phone and started calling around to his mates in different harbors along the Kerala coastline. Based on that real-time data by a mobilized user, he was able to make an informed decision about where he was going to spend his time. Thus, he was able to go to the market that was going to command him the best price. The Economist magazine got a hold of this story, and many of you would be familiar with this story, and they audited the process that ensued. The process that ensued was that on average, the net yields went up 8% for the fishermen in Kerala that used mobile technology, and the price to the consumer went down 4% because there was a greater equilibrium between demand and supply. This, as well, gives me digital and mobile goosebumps. The three primary arguments I'm going to make here today, ladies and gentlemen, is firstly the fact that everything that can be digitized in terms of communications eventually shall be digitized. This has impacts for you, but it also has impacts for those of you who are thinking about how do you reach not just Tier 1 cities, but also regional environments and Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities in your marketing campaigns, because digital can drive greater localization and greater personalization of content to win the hearts and the minds of tomorrow's customers. My second argument is that increasingly now, Indian citizens not just here, but globally, are mobilizing. They're taking their most important life matters literally into their own hands via their mobile devices, and this is driving a trend towards what we call multi-screening or omni-channel communications. And I want to take you through some examples, both global and local, of how this drives engagement and how this drives both global brands but also local brands. My final argument, though, is that yes, all of this digital technology is rather amazing, but how do we connect in a world where maybe not everyone is as digitized as the people in New Delhi, Bangalore, or Mumbai? And my argument here is that yes, we might have digital minds, but our hearts are enduringly analog, and analog channels of communications still have a space in our increasingly digitized future. I started off this presentation talking about the fact that I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with the idea of digital and technology. Let me give you the reason I have some hesitation about the digital world. And let me take you back to my native country of Sweden, a very, very cold place up north. Now, Sweden is not famous for our analog watches. That's Switzerland. Once upon a time, Sweden exported great tennis players like Bjorn Borg and Stefan Edberg around the world. Unfortunately, today, Roger Federer is Swedish, not Swiss, or he's Swiss, not Swedish, I should say. We also suck at making cheese. That's Switzerland, not Sweden. And our chocolate is terribly bad as well. I really don't know what props up the Swedish national economy, other than, of course, IKEA, which is a great contributor to the high divorce rate around the world when people go to IKEA and explore. And wait, they are coming to India very shortly as well. But let me take you back to the center of this watch for a moment to explore what happened in Sweden nearly 100 years ago. I should also say that whoever made this ad for a Swiss Tissot watch, Switzerland, not Swedish, over a map of Sweden should have been fired or at least never passed Year 9 geography. If they'd been in Rob's class, of course, they would know that this was Sweden and never made this advertisement on top of Sweden, but rather Switzerland. Let me take you back in history, nearly 100 years to Stockholm. And this is the urban vista, ladies and gentlemen, that greeted a man by the name of Georg Johansson as he moved from the Swedish countryside of West Gotland to the urban environment in Stockholm. It was an urban environment that sort of commingled the best of high tech at the time with high touch, tradition, and technology. An urban landscape still largely untouched by the T-model Ford. His commercial opportunity, and we'll just bring up that music again if we can, please. This was a time when really his commercial opportunity, having done an apprenticeship in Stockholm, a time when people still wore black and white because they were the only two colors going on back then, when he saw a commercial opportunity to dress the men of Stockholm for tomorrow as they were on the verge of international sophistication. This was a time pre-YouTube and pre-selfies when looking into a video camera was still very much of a novelty. People weren't familiar with content or video in the way that we are today. For him, it was all about the analog channels of communications, face-to-face, bespoke, and ensuring that he gave really good personal service to his clientele. And in a nod of respect to his background, from his agrarian roots, Georg Johansson, or the son of Johan, changed his surname to indicate the farm that he was from in a smart move of provenance marketing. And he changed his name from Johansson to the man from the southern farm, or Georg Sorman. Georg Sorman was my great-grandfather, and as you can tell, he must have been a little bit of a futurist because he sports a great haircut and a fantastic pocket square. Some things truly never go out of fashion. And Georg Johansson passed down this store via generations. He used to win the hearts and, I should say, the minds and the hearts of yesteryear's customers via advertisements in newspapers like these. And I should just apologize to all the ladies that this was pre-Swedish feminism. Today, my mother, Birgitta, who I think looks rather amazing for a 106-year-old, is running this little store, but her playing field has completely changed. Her playing field has been digitally disrupted. And she's trying her best to connect with the hearts and the minds of today's and tomorrow's consumers and customers. But what is happening is that the mobilized Swedish consumer is now doing their due diligence digitally. And rather than coming and spending time with her face to face, what they are doing is that they're hanging out with, I do my own stunts, ladies and gentlemen. They go into the store, they hang out with Hassan, Taylor, and my mother, Birgitta. They get some free intellectual property from my mother and from Hassan with their little measuring tapes. They get measured up. Then they ask pretty pertinent questions of my mother and of Hassan. They ask about the supply chain, where the cotton came from, whether the cotton was organic, and whether the whole supply chain meets the CSR standards that they expect. And after a little while, rather than transacting and giving some cash for a new suit or a new shirt to my mother, they say, Birgitta, we'll think about it. And what they do is that they exit the store to the sound of a very, very, very lonely little bell. They go out on the street, and if they have the professional courtesy or the human respect for my mother, they go around the corner before they then order the item online. I don't know if any of you see similar tendencies, maybe in tier 1 cities, for example, here in India, of mobilized consumers increasingly taking matters into their own hands and disrupting business. My mum's challenge today is that she's going into a battle, a gun battle with the likes of Amazon Price Check or eBay, and she's wielding a little analog kitchen knife. And the only way she knows how to market is the way that her dad and his dad before him used to do it. However, the Swedish consumer has moved. I want to explore not just Western consumers with you here today, but also some Indian market tendencies, because while some trends in the West go towards digitization, here we know that TV and print is growing, unlike some of the countries I've just mentioned so far in the presentation. My mum, however, fights this identity battle. She's trying to figure out where on the continuum between, on the one hand, the analog face-to-face and traditional marketing, and on the other hand, the digital world that she cannot touch and feel, the world of cyber, augmented reality, and virtual, where she should position herself. And I tell my mum, wouldn't it be amazing if you were able to connect with subcultures and subsegments of one unique human being? By taking all the rich data that you have about your clients, their families, how many generations they've shopped with us, whether their preference is for black or white clothes, or maybe some patterns, maybe a little bit of silk from this part of the world. And she goes, son, du förstår inte. Våra klienter vet inte hur man använder internet. Which is pretty profound if you happen to speak Swedish. And what it means, ladies and gentlemen, is she goes, son, you don't understand. Our clients don't know how to use the internet. And I don't know if any of you have heard these kind of conversations or this kind of pushback when you have your meetings, perhaps with your boards. But this is the battle she fights. Let me give you the terms of reference here for just a moment. The analog world is face-to-face. The digital world is interface to interface. One world is kind of old school, it's traditional. The other one is new school and forward-looking. One is about the offline, one is about the online. One is about the personal touch, the other one is about the digital connect. One is, yes, high touch. The other one is high tech and fast. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, one is about winning hearts, the other one is about winning minds. Let me go into my first argument here today. The fact that everything that can be digitized eventually will be digitized, both here and overseas. In 2011, towards Christmas in Australia, eBay posted this advertisement where they encouraged us to browse it at Westfield, one of the biggest shopping centers in the world, but buy it brand new on eBay. Their latest advertisement: dress like a model, shop like an accountant. Of course, this is disruptive to B2C consumer brands, of course, because it changes the game for us all. Let me give you a quick insight here into some of the global trends before we link this back to India in terms of where all of this digitization is leading us. Now, I must just check as well, who are the people into statistics and numbers here today? Anybody by show of hands? These slides are just for you, sir. Okay, we'll need some music with this if we can, maestros. So today, some of you might still be remembering the yellow pages and its circulation. Well, here's what it's done over the last 10 years. The long-term global trend in newspaper advertising revenue looked pretty healthy from the 1950s onwards, but then crashed around the turn of the millennium. Think about that decline in print advertising, and globally, it's down 42.9% in negative economic growth. And we're still going to need the A to the audio visual, please. The music formats that we now access, well, back in 2000, 93% of us in the Western world accessed music via CDs. In 2005, 9% digital, and 2010, 47% digital downloads, and these were only the legal ones, ladies and gentlemen. So what we're competing with here is Moore's Law, the doubling of computing power every 18 to 24 months, smashing more linear analog growth to pieces. And of course, social networks like Facebook are complying with these types of digital trends, the doubling of computing power every 18 to 24 months, meaning new avenues for you to do your marketing. And in 2011, we reached a global tipping point in terms of digitization, with more smartphones and tablets shipping globally than PCs and notebooks, meaning increasingly our consumers are now mobilizing. Digital retail, as I've said, is on the rise, and it's enjoying compounded annual growth rates globally of 10 to 14%, looking healthy out into the future at the expense of more analog medium. And now, how are we spending that money? We're increasingly via mobile commerce outside my mum's little shop in Stockholm, Sweden. In conclusion, there is a steady shift toward digital media at the expense of analog media. And yes, I am aware that the picture is slightly different in India. I'm going to need someone from the AV desk to make sure we've got my audio coming out of this machine towards the future. Thank you very much. Cool. So what this all means then is that Deloitte Digital has browsed and canvassed the digital landscape. And I just wonder if it's too late in the evening to talk about X and Y axes. It's okay, I've got your permission. They put out a recent report called the Short Fuse Big Bang Theory of Digital Disruption. And if you look at this X and Y axis, this graph, what we have on the X axis is the length of the fuse until digital disruption hits our particular industry. And on the Y axis, you have the size of the impact, either small or rather massive towards the top. Identify on this chart where your particular industry sits. Or if you happen to be B2B, maybe where your customers are sitting. We all know that my mum sits in retail trade, but even your industries, the early adopters and the innovators who might be in ICT and media today, short fuse, big bang. Digital disruption will impact all of our industry. It's just a matter of time. What we're seeing in the Western world today, and increasingly what you might be seeing in Tier 1 cities here in India, is research which shows, like AVG IT security, that in the Western world today, more 2 to 5-year-olds know how to play Angry Birds on their iPhones than know how to tie their shoelaces. Now, I'm not sure if there are any parents of 2 to 5-year-olds in the room here today, but I think these statistics are really, really worrying. If you thought Generation Y or the millennial generation born between 79 and 94 were just a little bit weird, how weird is this next generation of urbanites going to be? In the West, we call them the digital natives. These are people born speaking digital with no accent, as opposed to maybe an older generation like us, or maybe our parents, who might speak technology like digital immigrants with a heavy accent, and sometimes, like my mum, with some challenges. This kind of divide might also impact some of you guys, because in India, you have some of the lowest or some of the youngest populations in the entire world of Asia. Together with the Philippines, you have a bunch of digital natives who get this digital technology. And because they're born digital, in fact, for the 2 to 5-year-olds that we're thinking about and that I spoke about just earlier, for them, if they see a magazine on the floor, it's simply an iPad that doesn't work. But they'll try interacting with it as if it was an iPad. Make sure you check out some YouTube videos of this. These guys have shifting expectations on what screens your brand is visible across. And I'm going to argue in a moment that they're both going to be traditional and high-tech screens. My fundamental belief is that digital is not just a threat to the analog world, but it is a new way of getting professionally produced content, which I encourage all of you guys to do, to digitally disseminate that content, not just via the analog screens of old, but via digital media and multiple screens as well. We never really knew what the iPad was. In fact, Steve Jobs said it's a third category device. It's not a mobile phone, it's not a laptop, but it's somewhere in between. And he digitally disseminated this idea of the iPad, and some of us bought one, not really knowing why, but for the fact that Steve Jobs told us we really needed one. But this is a mobile communication revolution that leads to new modes of accessing your content. And my belief here is that digitization, yes, it might be disruptive, but it's only disruptive if you as business owners are not adaptive. And adaptive business owners at the likes of Netflix or at Apple providing genius recommendations, or Netflix providing very personal recommendations through digitization, or even Spotify, as we'll see in a moment, not giving us access to ownership of music content, but rather access to it by renting it, are new models of communications and new models of reaching markets. Let me give you a couple examples of why digitization leads to personalization. And if you are able to personalize communications down to a segment of one or a psychographic of one, maybe we just bypass some of the challenges around 22 languages and 1,600 dialects. It might be a possibility for you for the future. Take a look at this. I talked a little bit before about digital and analog and the digital. What digital enables today is not just word of mouth recommendations for a brand or something we should experience in terms of content, but also digital word of mouse. Recommendations now are replacing search in some areas. So on Spotify, I'm friends with my girlfriend, obviously, I'd be in trouble if I wasn't, and of course my friends. And one day Clementine recommends me a song. a song I would never, or a band I would never have experienced otherwise. This is not so different from word of mouth recommendations that, hey, Beatles is a really good band and they've just learned how to play the sitar in India. This is turning that little village into a global digitized village. And in India, already in 2010, 62% of consumers said that they do spend time in social networks and that they influence directly the brands that they buy. Remember, this is 4 years ago. What this means is that it gives the user who's mobilized power to make new decisions, either against or in favor of your brands. I can create my own unique playlists in Spotify, and according to Accenture research in the Western world, 28% of consumers have already created their unique modes of content via things like Spotify or Netflix, and 88% of us find this extremely useful. But again, the consumer is now in charge of how they might be experiencing your brands and your content. What this all means that in this new era of digital disruption, we all have to start thinking like media brands. We all have to produce content that is truly world-class. Digitization also drives localization. Earlier today, I checked on Spotify to see if I could get some songs that were kind of unique for India. And of course I could. You just type in via GeoTunes in Spotify, India, and you get songs unique to India that are hashtagged India. But even at a smaller level, you can go into New Delhi and get songs that are geo-specific to this location. Again, digitization can actually get us down into specific niches, or niches, as my American friends would say. Can I get a wave from the audio-visual desk if we have audio from my laptop available now? I guess I've just got to go with some nods. Okay, we'll see. I want to explore just one brand with you guys that does global branding, but also local branding extremely well. I know they have a checkered history in India, and they've been in and out of the market, but Coca-Cola is a brand we all know, so I want to use them for just a moment. It's a global brand, but they've had very tremendous success by also being extremely global. They win hearts and minds, not just via fancy websites, but they also go out to the guys, the little intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs who make sure that Coca-Cola bottles get delivered out in the countryside in India. And there's brand consistency all the way through. For 2010, for the Soccer World Cup, they staged a pretty clever campaign with a rapper from Somalia, Kanan. And Kanan made this song called Waving Flags. And Waving Flags became an international hit, not just in the English-speaking world, but this song was replicated across various countries. It became, together with cooperations in India, Sri Lanka, in Spain, and around the world, it became a hit, not just in English-speaking countries, but via hyper-localization as well. Thank you, we have audio. I love technology when it works. So this is the song, you might remember it, very kind of inspirational. But even more important here is when he starts localizing the content. This song was consistent across all the different markets, but when it really reached into the hearts and the minds, in terms of subcultures, is when the music started resonating in various languages, various dialects, various cultural sub-segments. And this is where we're going to turn to in just a moment. And it's going to be interesting to note how Coca-Cola is going to do this for the next World Cup, because this song, same song, slightly different lyrics, yes, #1 chart, across the world, nearly 20 different markets. So we'll turn it over for a moment and see what it looks like in the Indian context. Here he partners up with a man some of you might know called Yazim.
Give me freedom, give me fire, give me reason, take me higher. See the champions take the field now. Unify us, make us feel proud. गूंजती है सारी गलियां, धड़कने सब बढ़ रहा है. पूरी दुनिया मिल रही है, एक मंजिल मेरी है. Sing forever young, singing songs underneath the sun. Let's rejoice in the beautiful game. And together.
So essentially what they're doing here, if I had to be really, really blunt, is that they're going, open happiness, global brand, insert localization here. Maybe there's an opportunity for some of you, if you're kind of going with the entertainment feel, to just go, one great song, insert something in Tanglish at some stage, or something that's specific to Uttar Pradesh in the cities or the towns that you want to connect with. Maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe it's an idea worth exploring. Here are some of the countries where they partnered up with various famous artists in those hyper-localized markets as well, and where they went to the top 10 in the charts. Of course, more recently, they're teaming up with famous Bollywood stars, and I must just say, nods to Rob as well for having such a Bollywood ending to his lovely story before. But, you know, just recently, just yesterday, they signed up Deepika on my right. And, of course, they've been associated with Aishwarya Rai as well over the years as brand ambassadors. The final point on this is that digitization has disrupted the eyeball monopoly. Increasingly now, we want access to your content, to your brands, and we want to do our due diligence digitally, satisfy the consumer's increasingly digital, rational minds. Second point. Citizens are now mobilizing. What we are seeing is that Asia, as a continent, is continuing to dominate in mobile connections. And India is one of the leaders here. It's the third most digitized country in the world by the number of connections. But what we're also seeing is that that digitization is taking a leapfrog view compared to what happened in the West. Because, of course, it's wireless connections that people get to explore as a first view of the digital or the online world, which is bringing new dynamics into the market. One of those is that we're taking our important life matters into our own hands. And I want to reflect just a moment on the fact that mobile is shifting the game for consumers here. By using a personal example, it is not 500,000 kilometers, but it is, I think, pretty close too. In 2011, ladies and gentlemen, I ran the New York Marathon. I'd randomly kind of gotten in at the last minute, 16 hours before the race I signed up. Technically, Sorman Nilsson has never run the New York Marathon, but I got someone else's bib that couldn't run the race. So in his name, I ran the race. And I ran it with the aid of something called Nike Plus. Now, we all thought of Nike as a brand, as a global brand that provided us with sports apparel, shoes, shorts, etc. And at the time, I didn't even use Nike apparel. I ran in a pair of Asics. But Nike is no longer just a hardware brand because they provided me with an ecosystem, a new software that I could access my own digital data, my psychometric data on. And again, please, we'll have some audio for this. So what Nike Plus enabled me to do was to get the geo-specific local data about where I was running. It even told me the couple of times when I slowed down to go to the bathroom during the race. It also taught me the couple of times when I increased my speed because I was running through more dangerous neighborhoods. This is the rich layer of information that my informational seeking digitized mind is now able to get just via an app in my back pocket. This mobilization also gives us rich layers of comparative data to where everyone else was running as well. And I'm not really sure why some people were jogging out towards the Bronx. All the action really was in Manhattan that day. But there's nothing like analog feedback at some stage, like when I overtook this guy at 21 kilometers. As I was saying, I'd only signed up for the race 16 hours beforehand, so I always knew the last 42 kilometers were really going to suck, but I didn't know it was going to be quite that bad. But what Nike is doing here, and what's important, is that they're converging the analog with the digital. In fact, they're bridging our analog reality with our new digital mirror on our analog sweat. And this is turning it not just into a hardware company, but into a software company that sits at the intersection between the analog world and the digital world. This is where it's winning digital minds, but also analog hearts. And where they have really good digital data is that they find that someone that uses Nike Plus 5 times, once they've reached that threshold, they're more likely to buy a Nike product. Guess what shoes I now run in? They're now able to offer me very digitized, specific, localized, personal information saying, hey, Anders, are you starting to wear out your new Nikes because you've run this many meters? This is the level of personalization the future of marketing will really command. So second screens are moving into our homes, and increasingly they're empowering the user. This is going to require more quality content from Indian content providers and brands. And what we see in India, in the Indian economy, is that once you buy a smartphone that is more expensive than the average of 8,250 rupees, and you go into the 15,000 rupee segment and above, the data consumption rates go through the roof. This drives an opportunity for all of you to provide even more professional content. Think TV, but distribute more widely via second screens as well. Because of this, there's an increasing sense that, hey, maybe there's not a division between home and away. Maybe we can start a TV show at home, but then we take it with us via our tablets, maybe via our mobile phones, and we finish it somewhere else. This is breaking down boundaries. And increasingly, we're seeing smart players like ZEE moving into this world of the multi-screen environment and providing us services via Ditto TV, where we can experience the joy of the content via new devices as well. One quick case study for you on this before we start winding down. The case study is an organization called TED that many of you would be familiar with. It stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. A global conference founded in the early 1980s in California, but really where it's come to international fame and where it's built a global brand is that it started digitizing all its 18-minute format talks and distributing them for free through the world. They're going from a very local brand in Silicon Valley to a global brand that then becomes hyper-local again. Let me tell you the story. So how did they do that? They do that through brand mobilization and localization. You can experience TED, yes, via the website, via your desktop, but also via second screens like the applications, either on iOS or on Android, for example. But you can also experience TED via your iPhone as an application in a slightly smaller format, but again, optimized for a smaller viewing, perhaps as you're sitting on a bus in New Delhi on the way to work. You can also experience it via radio. All the talks are, of course, recorded, so if you can't visually see them, you can listen to them. Even my friend Max Harpham could do this. What's really smart, though, is that TED understood that not the whole world is English-speaking. So, of course, all the talks now have subtitles to connect with us globally. And some of them, via simultaneous broadcast, you can also hear translated into your local tongue. What they also offer, of course, are TED books. So if you don't want to listen but you want to read something, you can read the best books by TED speakers. And of course, if you can't travel to Oxford or to California to go to the two main TED events, well, what TED offers now are hyper-localized TEDx events that are independently organized around the world. So we could go to TEDx Trivandrum, down in Kerala, am I right? Or is my geography incorrect? We could go to a hyper-localized TEDx event where TED gives away its brand for other people to start experiencing it in a hyper-local context as well. This way, we get to access a global brand via digital screens, and maybe one day, if we have the aspirations, we can go to Oxford, like I did in 2009, and experience TED Global in a live context. That's where they make their money, when people part to go to Oxford or to Silicon Valley or to California to experience it face to face. The final point here is that in 2017, according to KPMG India data, smartphones are going to dominate internet access. And as you can see, the growth rates are exponential. The largest part of internet access will be via our mobile devices. So you must be thinking about these screens as you think about your brands and your content and how to win the digital minds and the analog hearts of tomorrow's customers. Now, I started this presentation talking a little bit about my mum, Birgitta, who's a slight technophobe. She speaks technology with a heavy accent. And sometimes she tries to remind me that there's a virtue in tradition and in analog media. And she sends me little advertisements like this. Now, just remember, my role here as a futurist is to sort of lower the intellectual rigor of the conversation. And I'm also Australian, so I have a slightly weird sense of humor. I'll leave it to these guys to say it best. Some things maybe can never be digitized. Have we got some audio for this, please?
Emma. 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 Emma.
So, I promised you, it was my role to bring down the intellectual rigor of the conversation. Every management consultant has to have a Venn diagram, and this is my version. I believe that the analog world of traditional marketing, traditional communications, and the digital world of the future, two worlds that my mum thinks are separate, that truly adaptive companies bring those two together, and the adaptive companies see that there's a sweet spot in the middle. And I like to call this the Digi-Log. It's also the title of my latest book, but I believe it's the kind of essence of innovation and convergence between different worlds like Tanglish or like hashtag Colaveridi. Do I say that correctly? Or Colaveridi? My Indian English is sucking at the moment. But I believe when you bring two different worlds together, maybe this is where innovation and things truly go viral. Let me wrap up with my final point. Digital minds, yes, but analog hearts. Digital communications don't fix everything. They don't solve every human communication challenge. In fact, digital predictive text can sometimes stuff us up. Anyone tried predictive texting at times, you know that this can cause a lot of challenges in our communications. But equally important, what we're seeing in the Western world today is that yes, people are downloading digital information. They're getting MP3 downloads. But nobody really remembers their first digital MP3 download. But vinyl, or your first cassette, is something we kind of remember forever. Interestingly, in a world of digital disruption and digital access to music via Spotify and iTunes, etc., what we're finding in the Western world, in both the US and Australia, vinyl sales are making a renaissance comeback with growth rates of 20% year on year. Why? Because we enduringly have some deeper cravings for depth, meaning, and not just speed. However, we need to bear in mind that increasingly in India and overseas, we're starting to become kind of channel agnostic. We might switch from the TV to our mobile devices, to our feature phone, to maybe a tablet, then going back to a newspaper. We need to start thinking omni-channel, if not multi-channel. And this is where your message will truly start resonating, both with the minds and the hearts of tomorrow's customers. Because Asian customers today are not happy with the experience that they're getting across channels. In fact, in recent research, Avaya found that, hey, we all want the multi-channel experience. In fact, 60% of us would be happy to pay more to be able to interact with a brand across several seamless channels. And in fact, 20% would be happy to pay 20% more if they were able to get that seamless integration across channels. Yet we, as brands, are not giving them that opportunity. The message here that I want to be loud and clear is that we mustn't throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. The analog still has a role to play when it comes to product quality, good membership services and loyalty clubs, and just a face-to-face customer service. That's never going to go away. Don't throw away the analog baby with the bathwater. If I said Google to you, would you think more digital or more analog? I'm reading your lips and it's saying digital. More digital. It's a digital disruptor, right? So in a move to sell us all on why we should go to Google AdWords, and the future is so digital, what do they send out? A printed $75 voucher, of course supporting the great Indian print industry that is also enjoying nice growth rates into the future. They're telling us through very analog, old school media that the future is all digital. And I think this is kind of ironic in some ways. I'm going to share with you just a couple of examples of how tradition and technology can come together in brand building. One example is the New Zealand brand Icebreaker. Icebreaker sells sports apparel for us to enjoy outdoors. It comes from merino wool back in New Zealand that have been carefully looked after by very traditional people in agriculture. Merino sheep farmers who've been maybe in the industry for generations. What Icebreaker did was they built a digital supply chain and told a story where they brought the supply chain alive. So what happens when you buy an item of Icebreaker clothing is that you can scan the barcode, or what the New Zealanders like to refer to as a barcode. I'm seeing if the New Zealand humor resonates with anybody. Okay, a few. But they're going beyond the barcode data. You can simply type it into the search engine here. And what this does is it starts bringing the whole supply chain all the way from the farmer who looked after the sheep all the way to the point of sale. It brings alive the brand, tradition, and technology converging together. We can see through geolocation data the 4 different sheep stations that the merino wool was sourced from, driving digital traceability and connecting us with the people actually responsible for keeping us warm, and of course the sheep who made the ultimate sacrifice to give their merino wool to us. But this proves that tradition and technology, the analog and the digital, don't have to be mutually exclusive. If you're smart and innovative about your branding, you bring the two together. Finally, it would be amiss and unethical of me as a Swede, 50%, not to talk about IKEA here today. IKEA prints more IKEA catalogs than the church or the Gideons print Bibles. We've heard about the Gutenberg Bible here today. Bibles will be in the entire Judeo-Christian world, in every hotel room around the world. But IKEA prints more IKEA catalog in a very secular, atheist way than there are those Bibles being printed every year. This is one of their biggest brand assets. So they don't want to throw that away in a digitized world, even though it's paper, which is apparently so old school. But old school can be cool if we digitally amplify it. So here's what IKEA did. They brought together the analog with the digital. And here's how they start going digi-log, bringing the two together. Nowadays, when you get your IKEA catalog, you used to just be able to read it, and we'll grab some audio for this as well if we can. But now you just throw it down on your floor in your living room, and all of a sudden you open it up to the particular page where you want to see something. And what happens is that that book or that catalog jumps alive. You view it through your mobile device, your tablets, etc. And to scale in a three-dimensional augmented reality, all of IKEA's furniture kind of come alive in your own personalized, hyper-localized area. This is the way that digital and analog are now starting to converge. This is the space where innovation really is going to happen into the future. And of course, they're Swedish, so we have to have a bit of weird humor in here as well. But this is hyper-localization through digital, but still retaining the best of the analog world as well. So media and entertainment in India continues to enjoy healthy growth. Analog television is not going away tomorrow. It's just that it's going to be complemented and converged via multiple screens. We all need to think as digital media companies providing great content, think that it has to pass through several filters. Quality has to be engaging, but you need to be thinking about optimization in a hyper-local way as well. Whenever we consult with companies around the world, we make sure that we don't throw away the analog baby with the bathwater. We combine both new ideas with traditional ideas, the analog with the digital. I want to wrap up this presentation by talking about my little friend, Max Harpham, who I started out talking about in today's presentation towards the very, very beginning. Max Harpham, and this gives me digital goosebumps again, he's the only kid that during the traditional annual Australian swimming carnival, he's the only kid that can properly hear underwater. Because his sound, his hearing is digitally amplified. But if it wasn't for the people at charities like the Shepherd Centre, who calibrate his devices, who provide him and his family with support and audiology support, his teachers who are coached on how to also ensure that they speak and articulate the words, so should the digital technology run out of batteries, he's still able to lip read. If it wasn't for them, the digital technology wouldn't make any sense. So we still need people, we still need humans to help us out in the future. The three things I've talked about here today is first, the idea that everything that can be digitized eventually will be digitized. And this drives huge opportunities both for personalization and hyper-localization of content to get into specific subcultures, dialects, religions around India. The second point is that increasingly the Indian consumer is mobilizing, taking life matters into their own hands and ensuring that they gain access to you via multiple screens. And the final idea is, yes, digital minds, but we mustn't forget about our analog hearts. So some of you might ask yourselves, whatever happened to your mum's little business in Stockholm, Sweden, that 98-year-old business? Well, we're not quite out of the woods quite yet, but we're viewing the centenary in a new light. And I must just say, it must be very, very annoying for my mum as a technophobe to have a futurist as her son. Can you imagine the kind of conversations we have over the dinner table when we have dal makhani, for example? Very annoying conversations. But she's finally getting this idea that analog tradition and her brand will not be thrown away in a digital future. So we recently engaged my father, who's a retired colonel in the Swedish Army, which by the way, is a great career move because we never really go to war. Although he always reminds me that he's always done his duties with NATO and both in Afghanistan and Kosovo. But we recruited him as a male model recently, very kind of Zoolander, very Bollywood. And in this video, he simply ties a little four-in-hand universal tie knot. The interesting thing about this video, and you don't need IKEA's budget to do this, by the way, we simply got some students in because they're cheap, is that it got amplified both via Facebook, via Twitter, and the main Swedish newspaper, and Mum had her best 2 months' worth of sales in the last 10 years. And I have a strong gut feel and some correlative informational research that shows that there was some strong correlation between the two. This is Dad wrapping it up for us today. You don't need to speak Swedish to get the gist of this.
Den slipsknut som jag nu ska knyta kallas för four-in-hand eller universalknuten. Den blev faktiskt nästan perfekt, för de här blev nästan likadana.
So I think my dad is totally DDG, or what I understand being drop dead gorgeous in India. And he's so proud there towards the end when he gets the balance of the two nearly perfectly even. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage all of you as you go out into this digitally disrupted future tomorrow in your work environments to make sure that you start thinking about these disruptions. We'll see if this works. Here we go, and we'll have some audio with this. That you think about these digital disruptions not as just waves of change, but to start observing the environment around you in Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, in regional environments in India, and think about how digital can drive new personalization, hyper-localization, to get you beyond linguistic and cultural barriers, and maybe, just maybe, like Nike Plus, start connecting with a psychographic of one. This is the way of the future, to not throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater, but rather combine tradition and technology together. This way, you may well go beyond the Indian shores and win both the Indian consumers' hearts and minds of tomorrow, but maybe even a global audience with a view to 2020 and beyond. Thank you very much for hanging out here this evening.
For sharing that beautiful story with us, for sharing your life experiences. And we would like to hold you back on stage with us for some more time, as we now have a Q&A lined up next. And for the same, I would like to request and invite on stage Mr. Ramesh. Please join your hands together and welcome again Mr. Ramesh. Now, you all can ask your questions to these two gentlemen, and let's get started. Thank you.
Guys want to ask some questions or itching for a drink? So I have a little story which I was reminded of when you were talking. So I have a friend called Giri. He's a bit of a star. So he's a quiz master who goes around to many schools across the country. And he relates a story of a little boy, about 14 or 15, from actually DPS in Delhi. And he had just finished a quiz and he was fiddling with his phone. And this guy thinks Giri is very cool. So he comes up and asks, hey, what you doing? He says, I'm using my phone. So what do you use it for? He says, well, I fly a lot, so I use it for an alarm in the morning. And then I talk on the phone because I have to do a lot of talking with my clients and people who ask for quizzes. And then, Said, well, I use it for texting. He says, but Giri, do you use it for Facebook? He said, no. Do you use it for Twitter? He says, no. I said, do you play Angry Birds on it? He said, no. He says, why the hell don't you just use your landline? You know what I'm saying? And so it seems to me, from the gist of what you said, that we may fall into one or the other, yeah? Become completely digital or completely analog because you're holding on to one or the other for dear life and miss the point about the fact that it's only another technology which makes us do the same human things for 60,000 years that we've been doing, but in a better or a more relevant or current way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, to your point around, am I good from this one? Yeah. I think to your point about Gutenberg before, I think Martin Luther, yes, he had the book, which of course was powerful in terms of replicating and duplicating the message, but he was also going around meeting people, making sure he had, his version of disciples that were meeting face to face. So in fact, he kind of had multiple screens of various ways of getting his message across, and I think it's no different today. We have to engage across multiple screens. It's not an either or, it's an and also.
Yeah. So who has digital questions of Anders? They're absolutely clear, they're completely confused on which one it is. No questions? Or is that the thirst? Okay, we will then quench your thirst. But Anders, thank you very much for being here. It was revealing. It was also frightening at the same time. But I guess we'll go home and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.